Hello and great to see you all joining this week's Oxygen XML Live experience. My name is Alim Belu and I will be your host for today's live webinar called Creating Frameworks Using an Extension Script. As you might know, a framework refers to a package that contains resources and configuration information to provide ready-to-use support for an XML vocabulary or document type. So during this event, I invited my colleague Alex Gitiano, development lead at Syncrosoft, the company that develops the Oxygen suite of products, to take an extensive look at the specific method where a framework can be created using a special XML descriptor file, either from scratch or by extending an existing built-in framework, such as DITA or DocBook, and then making modifications to it. So get ready because there will be a lot of interesting topics to be covered. Now, before Alex starts his presentation, let me recap the useful information that you need to know when it comes to the Oxygen Live events, this one making no exception. As always, all of our events are being recorded, so today's event makes no difference. After the webinar comes to an end, the recording will be made available on the event page on our site, oxygenxml.com, along with the slides and samples of Alex's presentation. And also, the recording will be uploaded on our YouTube channel titled Oxygen XML. Another important aspect is that as we go along, we encourage you to ask us questions by using the questions panel from the GoToWebinar interface, where Radu Koravu, project manager at Syncrosoft, will assist us by answering your questions in real time. So, with this being said, I'm ready to invite to the stage Alex Gitiano. Hello, Alex.
Hello, Aline. Thank you for a kind introduction. Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for attending this webinar. So, like my colleague said, this one is about frameworks in Oxygen, a concept that even though you haven't already encountered, it's there, it's omnipresent, it's in the shadows, and it helps you in your day-to-day work in Oxygen. So a short presentation of today's agenda. We'll split it in 4 sections. First, we'll plunge a bit into this framework concept. Next, we'll see the challenges that one could face while developing these frameworks in Oxygen. Basically, we'll see the reason why we've introduced this new way of creating frameworks using an extension script, what benefits it has. It's a raison de vivre. And afterwards, we'll take 2 use cases and see how this script rises to the task. The first one, it's about creating a new framework for a new type of XML vocabulary. The other one, a use case that appears quite often about how to extend one of the built-in Oxygen framework like DITA or DocBook. So, for those of you that are not yet familiar with the concept, the framework is basically a bundle of resources like CSS files that are used to control the visual editing, the author mode in Oxygen, or maybe the schemas associated with your documents, as well as a configuration. For example, the transformation scenarios are a configuration that describe how to publish your documents, or another example of a configuration are the author actions, the actions available in the author mode. And this entire configuration sits in the so-called framework file. in case you've stumbled upon it. It's a file with the .framework extension. So how do you define such a configuration file in Oxygen? How the classic way of doing it? Well, was by using the graphical user interface. And I'll switch to Oxygen to have a look at that. So you go to Options, Preferences. On the Document Type Association page, and here you'll notice the existing frameworks, the ones built in Oxygen. And you can click New here on the bottom and create your new framework. You give it a name, um, a store location where this configuration will be saved, and then you start configuring it like, well, mandatory, the association rules, of course. This is how Oxygen will match your documents with a specific framework. So you have to give these association rules, but other things as well, the author mode, put references to CSS, define actions. So as you can see, it's quite friendly and easy to create such a configuration. But it can become cumbersome in some cases. For example, let's assume that I'm working on so I've already created a framework. Let's assume it's a DITA framework. And then I realize that I invoke an action here on the toolbar, the B, and it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. Let's assume it inserts an italic element or something completely wrong or partially wrong. Well, in this case, I have to go to Options, Preferences, edit the framework again, identify the particular action. Maybe here it was an italic and it should be a B fragment or something else. Then exit with OK out of all these dialogues and return to the editor and try it again, the action. But this time it might work, or maybe it doesn't, it still doesn't work, in which case I have to go back all the way in the graphical user interface to that place, make another change. So it's a switch between the graphical user interface setup and then testing what you did, the change that you did in the editor. And it could become sort of a rinse and repeat operation. So that was one challenges one could face while developing these frameworks. Another challenge appears when, well, like I said, Oxygen has a number of built-in frameworks. One for working with data documents, another for working with DocBook or TI, and so on. But as much as we try to make these frameworks as helpful as possible, the reality is that requirements and preferences differ from one company to another. So when a company starts using Oxygen, it will discover that they want the framework, the configuration, a bit changed, to be changed a bit. And when they decide that, they have two possible choices of action. They can either alter the built-in framework, and by that I mean that they go to Options, Preferences, they identify the framework, and just like I did in the new framework, they change it. They do all the changes that they deem fit. Well, if you do it like that, the good news is that the framework will remain as you change it, even when you switch to new Oxygen versions. But the bad news is that it will stay the same when you switch to new Oxygen versions. What I mean by that is that uh, each new Oxygen version comes with improvements in these built-in frameworks. And if you've changed the built-in framework, you won't benefit from them. So they won't apply anymore. Imagine it's like with Git branches. You've taken this DITA branch and you've created your custom DITA branch, and it evolved differently than the built-in DITA branch, and now you have to merge the changes manually. So you have to compare your changed DITA framework with the new DITA framework released by Oxygen, and see what's new and bring it in your own framework. And that can be a challenge. It could be done fairly fast, or depending on how many improvements we make, it might take a while longer. So that's why we recommend people to extend a built-in framework, an existing framework, instead of altering it. That means instead of hitting edit, you choose extend. It doesn't look any different, but the difference is that Oxygen will record sort of like an edit script. So it will record the modifications done to the base framework, in this case the DITA framework. And when you upgrade to a new Oxygen version that comes with upgraded and improved DITA framework, your changes will apply automatically on top of the new base framework. So you will have them without any effort. But there's a catch here as well, because this extension mechanism only works on one level. So for example, if the lightweight DITA framework is an extension of the DITA framework, you won't be able to extend it again. You are forced to edit it. So with these challenges in mind, we've created this framework extension script. It's an XML language. There's a small sample here, and it can be used to create a new framework or to extend an existing one. And in this sample here, you'll notice that it says here it's the base attribute has the DITA value. So it means that what I'm creating is an extension of the DITA framework. And what's good, what we gain compared with the already existing extension mechanism, is that this script works on multiple levels. So you can have an A framework that extends a B framework, that extends a C framework, and so on. So to see it in action, let's take the first use case, the one about creating a new framework. So we don't have time to do everything in the framework, but let's create the association rules, which are mandatory, like I said, set up the validation, content completion, have some templates, some document templates, and we'll also set up a bit the author mode, like providing a CSS and an action, and maybe contribute an action in the content completion. So again, I'll switch to Oxygen and I'll open a document, and it's an XML vocabulary used in Germany. It's called P-mode. It's a while back I had another webinar in which I've created a framework for it, but using the classic graphical user interface approach. But this time we'll use the script. So right now we don't have much help from Oxygen. If we validate, it complains that it can't find the DTD. We have no content completion. Switching to author mode doesn't look quite well because there's no setup done. So let's build this configuration. So I will use a template. So here, if you take a look here in the project, in my project, you'll notice I have a frameworks directory. The project is configured, we see here in the location, to look for frameworks inside this directory. And inside the P-mode directory, I have all the resources. Like, if you remember, the framework is a bundle of resources. I already put the resources here in the P-mode directory. And now we have to create the configuration that brings all these resources together. So from new file, I will choose the create framework script. It's a template. Let's give it a name, maybe pmode.xf, exf. The extension is important. So we've created here, and it's a starting point. Let's start by changing the name, pmode. Maybe give it a description. And like I said, the associations are important. If we take a look at our document, we notice that it has a specific public ID. So this public ID uniquely identifies a document as being a P-mode document. So let's use that. So I'll remove the other criteria. The public ID here is enough. So we put the public ID here and we save it. Now, if we go back to the document and we show the properties view, you'll notice here that it matched. So our P-mode document has been matched, which is good. And also, if we go to options preferences on the document type association, you notice that a new framework named P-mode has appeared. If we try to edit it here, you will see a question. It's a kind of like a warning saying that this framework is generated from a script. So you can only view or edit the script in the editor. You cannot edit it in the graphical user interface, but it's useful to inspect it like so in the graphical user interface to see the result and decide if you've edited correctly the script or something is not quite right. So we see here in the association, the public ID that we've created, the description, the name. It's not too much yet because we are just starting to create the configuration. Now, let's fix the validation. You'll notice here, let's move it a bit up, the XML catalogs entry. So we have in our PMO directory a catalog that maps the PMode public ID to the location where these DTDs are. So in order for Oxygen to find them, we'll just put here, please note that the path, I've specified the path using the this editor variables, so the framework editor variables to make them portable. You know, this way, when no matter where this framework, this file resides, Oxygen will know to dynamically expand the framework editor variable to the location where this framework is present. So now if we return and we validate, you notice here on the bottom it says validation successful, and we also have content completion. Hint that the schema is now located. Right. So now let's concentrate on the author mode. In order to make it work, we need a CSS. We already have this CSS here in the CSS directory. Is this pmode.ls file. So what we have to do is go here in the author container and add a CSS. Again, I'll use the framework editor variable. And input the path. Just save. And just when we return, it's starting to look usable. So we have lists and images are rendered. So again, and we have also some form controls here. So it's now we can actually use the author mode. Next, let's create an action, an author action. Maybe one, well, it will be an action to insert a table. The way you can define actions when you're working with these scripts, so you can't define them internally. The author actions are collected automatically from this predefined location. So inside your framework directory, from the external author actions directory, or it can be another predefined name. It's the prefix, the name, actually it's the name of the script followed by external author actions. So if we open this XML document, this is an author action defined externally in its own XML file. So it has a name and it uses the E18N. This is an editor variable useful if you want to provide translations in all the languages supported by Oxygen. And in the operation container, you can specify one or more operations. You'll have content completion with a built-in operation. And for each operation, you can give arguments. Again, there will be content completion to help you with the name of the arguments. But let's focus on what we have here. So this is an operation to insert a table. And luckily, the pmode vocabulary uses the calls table model, just as DITA does. So what I will do is I will make use of the customizations that Oxygen already has for DITA. So the operation that I'm invoking is this insert table operation from the DITA namespace. Being inside this predefined location means that Oxygen will pick up automatically this action. So if we inspect it again in the graphical user interface, you'll notice that the insert table action already appears here. So it's being collected. But there are two more things that we need to do in the configuration. So the first one is, this is not a common operation inside Oxygen. It's one specific for DITA, for the calls model. And it resides inside this DITA jar file. So in order for this operation to be available in the pmode framework as well, we'll go here and in our script, and in the class path container, we'll add an entry with the path to this DITA jar file. And the second thing that we need are the translations of these labels. Again, I've copied these translations from the Oxygen DITA framework, and I've put them here in this directory. So we'll add another entry here in the class path to this directory. So Oxygen will find them. And now let's put this action in the toolbar, the contextual menu, and why not the content completion. So again, in the author container, we have a toolbar section. And so you'll notice that the ID of this action is insert table. So let's copy it and put it here. And in the contextual menu, we can create a submenu, maybe say table, dedicated to tables. And we can put the action here as well. And in the content completion, well, maybe I'll do that afterwards. Let's have a look first at what changed so far. So if we take a look on the toolbar, we'll notice the insert table action. Also, in the contextual menu, there's the table section with the same action. We can click it. Then we insert the action. We have an error because the pmode has a small changed, has a small difference compared with a call stable model that is it needs a table with attribute, a table. But it's a good opportunity for me to present you schematron validation and quick fixes. So here we can just click add attribute and select a value, and we solve this validation error. Now, the content completion, what I meant by that is that in Oxygen, if you press enter, you'll see all the possible elements that can be inserted. And if I select table to insert a table element, I'll get an empty table, which is not very helpful. So I would prefer to see the dialog that we've seen earlier that offered more flexibility for inserting tables. So to do that, I'll return to the script, and in the content completion section, author action, I'll say that I want to add this insert table in the content completion, and it should replace the table entry because it's an improved version for inserting tables. Again, I save it. We return to the document, and now if you write table, we notice just this insert table entry, and if we select it, we get the same dialog, so the same action is being invoked. Right. So I think this is pretty much all that I wanted to present on this first use case on creating a new framework from scratch. The second use case was the one about extending an existing framework. And let's assume that I use DITA as the framework, so I work with DITA documents, but I want to make small changes to the built-in DITA framework from Oxygen. And for what I have in mind is to change a bit the author mode with new CSS, change a bit the actions presented in the author mode, and let's also configure a bit the content completion. We'll use this ccconfig way of doing it, which is different than what we've seen earlier. We'll get into more details in just a bit. So back to Oxygen. Again, here in the frameworks directory, I have a custom DITA directory with all the resources needed for my new framework. I will go to the new document wizard, but this time I will choose the extend framework script. Let's give it a name, custom DITA, and hit create. We get a validation error because it says the base attribute must specify the name of the extended framework. It's here. So let's write DITA. Let's give it a name. Like imagination, so I'll just say custom DITA. Okay. We'll keep a high priority, so our custom framework is preferred to the DITA framework. Again, if we go to options preferences, we'll you will notice that the custom DITA framework has appeared. So what did I say I want to change? So, oh, right. So on new CSS. So in the author, CSS, just like we did it before, we add a new CSS. It's here, custom.css. If we save it, so let's see this CSS again. I lacked imagination here. We just make the title using a red foreground color. It's just we want to know that this CSS is actually being used. So if we open a sample DITA document, you'll notice that the titles are beginning to be red. And also, if we take a look in the properties section, you'll notice that the new framework is being the DITA custom one. So the CSS, and I also have here, again in this predefined location, a new action, a new author action for inserting warnings. Well, actually, it just inserts a note element, but it has this type, the type attribute set to attention. So let's put this new author action in the toolbar contextual menu, and why not in the content completion? Again, in our script, what's the ID? It's insert warning. So on the toolbar, you know what? Let's not put it. Well, I can put it like this, and it will appear here at the end of the toolbar. But we can also place it in a specific location. So I might want to put it after this action that inserts a new paragraph. If I want to do that, what I need to do is go and see the ID of this action. So the action that inserts a paragraph has the paragraph ID. And with this information, I return to the script. And I will say here, I'll use the anchor attribute. And I give the ID of that action. So I say and I also can use the position to place it either before or after the action of this particular action in the toolbar. So now if we take a look again in the DITA document, you'll notice that this new action is placed after the action that inserts a paragraph. Now for the contextual menu, let's put it inside this insert submenu, because we already have here, you see an insert note. Let's place it after this insert note action. Again, we need to go in the graphical user interface and inspect a bit the configuration. The action that inserts a note has the insert note ID, and in the contextual menu, the insert submenu has this name because it's being translated. So now here I will say that I want to put my action in this insert submenu, and again using the anchor, I place the is the insert warning. I will put the insert warning action after the insert note. We switch to the DITA document, and now in the insert submenu, you'll notice the warning action being after the one that inserts a plain note. And of course, we can put it in the content completion as well. Like so, we won't replace anything, just add it there. So now if we press enter, here it is, our action. Right. If we take a look here in our resources, you'll notice this cc config file. So this is a file for configuring the content completion proposals. And you can do a lot of things. For example, you can reject elements. You can say that I don't want these 3 elements, just cut them out of the DITA vocabulary, don't offer them to me in the content completion because I don't use them. When I have short descriptions, just render them as this nice label. Or I can say when an example is being inserted, put these children as well, a title, a paragraph, and a code block, because that's how I write my examples. And just offer me these 3 children as possible elements as well. To instruct Oxygen to load this configuration file, all we need to do is to put an entry in the class path. Framework, resources, the trick here with this suffix, the ext suffix, means that it will apply as a different layer. So the base framework might have this file, which will be automatically loaded, and on top of that, this additional layer is being applied. So I will just save the script, return to our document, and now if I say I want to insert an example, it it should have a title and a paragraph. Maybe oops, here it is, the typo. So the editor variable is like this with a $, not a sharp. I hope it's correct this time. Let's see. Well, still not correct. Right. So now we have a title for the example that it's red because all of our titles are now red, and a paragraph in which we describe what this example is for, and a code block in which we write maybe a piece of code. So this is the second use case. So to summarize this, the benefits of using an extension script as opposed to doing the configuration in the graphical user interface is that a script is easy to write, it's easy to test. You just have, you open it in an editor and you make changes and then switch to the other editor with the document and test your changes. And it's also easy to maintain because it's XML. It means you can commit it to your version control system, and as you make changes and record all those changes. A few words about deployment. As you've noticed, there are two options. So scripts are automatically detected by Oxygen and loaded. It's how I did it. I just made the changes and saved them, and afterwards I just switched to the document and test them because Oxygen detected the change automatically. But there's a second option. You can compile them into a classic .framework file. So you can do that either using this contextual menu action, compile framework extension script, or there's even a command line script in the scripts directory. It's compile framework script.bat, or there's also a script for Linux and the Mac. Why would you prefer to compile it? Well, while you develop it, it's great to go with the first approach, have Oxygen automatically detected, but maybe when you deploy it to the team, it might make sense to compile it. It will be faster. Oxygen will load it faster. And it makes sense with the command line script. Maybe if you have a continuous integration server that builds the Oxygen framework, you can use the script inside these continuous integration pipelines to get the framework that afterwards gets deployed to the entire team. And how, that brings us to the question, how you deploy the framework, the entire framework, the bundle of resources and the configuration to the team. Well, you can do it with an Oxygen project like I have in this presentation. For example, a project manager or one member of the team does this setup, and afterwards all the members of the team, they just open the Oxygen project and work with it, and the framework is automatically loaded. Or you can pack it as an add-on and use the add-ons mechanism for deploying it. The add-ons are available here from help, install new add-ons. And basically an add-on is just a packaging way. So you can package either a plugin or a framework, and afterwards they can be installed using this wizard, the install new add-ons wizard. You just give an update site, an URL where these add-ons are published, and the user will be able to install them from there. So thank you. There you have it. I hope I've convinced you of the benefits that these frameworks extension scripts bring, and maybe you'll give it a try, see how you can convert your classic framework to this new way of describing a framework configuration. Radu, do we have any questions asked during the webinar?
Hi, Alex. Thanks for the great presentation, and thanks for working on this feature, which will be quite useful for our integrators. I will go through the questions. So one of the questions is if you can use editor variables in the storage location. And I think the question was about the preferences document type association locations page. If you can specify references to custom frameworks using editor variables. And the answer is that yes, you can specify references using editor variables. You can use the project directory editor variable, and also you can save the entire locations page at project level if you want to share a project which contains frameworks to others.
Right.
A question from Evan is, what is the most important reason for creating an extension script as opposed to extending an existing framework in the GUI? And is it to adapt better to new versions of Oxygen? And I think you covered this after Evan asked the question. You talked about the benefits of the AXF framework. For me, one of the benefits is that I can see in the AXF precisely what changes I make to a base framework, and the AXF is human readable. When the .framework file is quite hard to read and understand.
Right, you're absolutely correct. I mean, if you take a look at and then if you extend the framework and you make changes, when you look, you see the results, and it's not clear what changes you did, perhaps. So you need to look a bit deeper to understand these changes in the .framework file, as opposed to the script where all these changes are declarative there.
Moving on, a question from Chris is, why don't you need to include the file name translation.xml? And I think the question is for when you have a translation file in the framework, why don't you include the entire path to it in the AXF?
Right. You want to answer that, or should I?
So my answer to that was the fact that once you include the reference to the I18 folder in the class path, Oxygen looks automatically for the translation XML inside that folder.
Yep.
I think the reason for that was that we wanted to maybe place multiple translation XML files there, maybe for each language have a separate translation underline French.xml, for example, and translation underline Spanish, and we wanted to take all those files from the folder and use them for translating the framework labels. Okay, and Chris asks you, he says that it would be helpful if Alex could cover the templates folder and how to use those.
I forgot. I forgot to show that, right, for the new framework. Right, so the templates. So the document templates in Oxygen are just normal files, and the content of the file is the content of the template, what you get when you choose that template. So in this pmode framework, in the templates directory, I have two such document templates for a task and a tools. And to instruct Oxygen to look for the templates here, we'll edit the script, and you see we have a document templates container, and well, it's just this exact path. So in the frameworks, the framework directory, the templates directory here. So now if I hit new, you'll notice this pmode section with a task and a tools. So these two templates were collected from this directory. So if I choose it, then I'll get some pmode task or a tool. Yeah, and the properties file is, this one should say tools. It's for giving metadata, to associate metadata with the template. So in this case, this tools template, the metadata that I specify is a display name. It should say tools with a capital T, to look better. So we have tools and tasks. My God, I did it the other way around. So again, we have a task and a tools, and if I choose task, it will give me a task. Radu?
Moving on, Chris asks, in the reject elements, would you list the elements you disallow, such as hazard statement, or is there a different or better way to constrain multiple elements? And I think Chris has in mind the fact that in DITA you have domains which group elements together, like the software domain, the hazard domain, and maybe at some point we can analyze if we can maybe remove an entire domain of elements without specifying them item by item
Right.
from the content completion window. So maybe this is something we need to write down for a future improvement.
Yes, definitely.
Question from Michael: does this method work with Oxygen Web Author too?
Yes, it does.
Question from Jonathan: what are the advantages and disadvantages of including a framework in a project versus an add-on?
Well, I wouldn't say advantages and disadvantages. It's just a judgment call that you'll have to take. For example, there are more reasons for you to use an Oxygen project file. You can save in it other options as well that make sense because all the members of the team should have the same Oxygen configuration, like formatting, so that when you commit to the version control system, the documents don't are indented differently, so you lose the important changes. You can also put maybe a layout file in the project as well, to just show them the views and the actions on the toolbar that actually make sense and are helpful for your team. So Oxygen project files are really powerful, and there are many reasons for you to use them. But if for some reason you don't want to use them or you don't need to, then you also have this add-on mechanism in which you release the framework at a specific URL, and when new versions are released, your team members will receive a notification a new version is available, and they will be able to update to that new version.
Also, projects are limited to the local disk, meaning that they are quite good when you have Git repositories and everybody has their own copy of the project. But
Right,
if you have a content management system which is remote, if all your content is remote, you need to go with the add-on installation.
Right, so you might not be able to put the project file in the CMS as well. The project is an XPR file.
Okay. Moving on to Jean or to Jean, can you extend an extension script through the GUI at all, say DITA2.x, or only through scripting? So it's a question about extending an extension.
Yes, so only through scripting. But the thing is that this DITA.2 is now an external script as well. So it's interesting that, because you will make use of that multiple inheritance supported by these framework scripts. So you create your script that extends this DITA.x, which is actually a script that extends the DITA framework. And you'll be able to find these scripts in the frameworks directory of Oxygen. So if you, I'm not sure if, let's see if I am able to do that. If I go to my Oxygen and the frameworks, then DITA, you'll notice here a lot of these scripts, see, and there's a DITA.x extension.
I'm not sure we are shipping them in 23.1, but we'll probably ship them in 24, the AXF.
I think in 20, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Moving on, a question from John. Have you created a magic wand to convert a traditional extension into a scripted extension, into a scripted version? So a dot framework converted to an AXF?
Not yet. Not yet, we haven't. It's on our to-do list, but we didn't get the time to do it yet. But I see the advantages of having such a magic wand.
Again from John, would diffing the DITA framework with our current extended DITA framework be a good place to start to create the AXF version by hand? So if you look, I think an XSLT style sheet could be created to create such an AXF, I think.
Well, if I understand it correctly, if John already edited the built-in DITA framework, instead of extending it.
No, I think he left it untouched, and then he wants to compare it with the extended DITA framework.
Oh, so he has an extension. So he has an extension.
Yep.
Well, in that case, what your suggestion could work, what you're suggesting could work quite well, because if he looks inside the .framework file, which is an XML as well, he'll notice that edit script. So what the changes we've recorded to the base DITA framework. So yes, an XSLT could generate this script.
Another question, is using scripting, creating a custom framework extension, the fastest way to test the custom CSS for author mode? If not, which method would you suggest? So how can you quickly test a custom CSS for author mode?
Well, the thing with CSS is that you just need to do one change in the framework. You add that new CSS, and afterwards you just open the CSS and you make changes in it and switch to the XML document and see how your changes fare. So I would say that either way, so even with the script or with the classical way of editing a framework inside the graphical user interface, testing a CSS is fairly easy.
And John and Michael say thank you, Alex. A very good and informative presentation. And these are all the questions that have been asked so far.
Aline, do you want to take it from here?
Yes, thank you, Alex, and thank you for a great presentation as usual, and for answering our audience's questions. And of course, a big thank you to Radu for answering the questions in real time behind the scenes. Now, as I stated in the beginning of this event, this webinar is being recorded, and you will find the recording along with Alex's sample files and slides on the event page that you can see right now. And if you have any comments or follow-up questions regarding his presentation, you can write to us directly by using the Oxygen feedback commenting platform found at the bottom of this very same page. Now, I have to tell you that today's event was the last one for the current weekly series that we are having every Wednesday. But don't worry, because you will have plenty of chances to meet the Oxygen team at the upcoming conferences or online events, such as the Convex conference that you can attend next week, starting the 26th of April. Also, we encourage you to take a look at our events page, where you can also find what we are preparing for you, the future events that will be scheduled there. And of course, you can also find the links to register for free to all of our future events like webinars. And reaching the end of our event, let me thank Alex again for the entire information that he shared with all of us today. So thank you, Alex.
Thank you all for attending, of course, and I hope
Uh,
you'll put it to good use.
I'm sure they will. And of course, a big thank you to everyone for joining us every week, and for joining us this week. And until next time, just stay safe and have a nice day or evening. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.